Get ready to dive into the most remarkable stories of the Old West. Among these names emerge the famous Dalton brothers, who started their journeys as lawmen. For a time, they were respected as trustworthy men, but one event changed everything and led them down the path of outlaws. By the end of this video, you'll discover what truly motivated this surprising turn. Before that, let's explore some of the most notorious thieves who made history and continue to spark curiosity to this day. The story you are about to hear involves a group that left its mark on history through its audacity and the fame gained from its spectacular robberies. We're talking about Jesse James and the infamous James Younger Gang. It all began shortly after the American Civil War, a period that united these rebellious young men not just through battle, but also through blood. Many of them were cousins, and together they decided to turn their lives into an outlaw adventure. One of the most defining moments of this journey took place during a quiet trip on the Rock Island train. The passengers, unsuspecting, were calmly going about their journey when suddenly, a violent jolt disrupted the peace. The train had been deliberately derailed by a group of masked men. It was the notorious gang led by Jesse James and the Younger brothers. Unlike other criminals of the time, they followed their own code. They never robbed or harmed innocent passengers. The gang's objective was clear: the vault filled with money. And that's exactly what they went for that night, acting swiftly and leaving no victims behind. The outcome of this bold robbery went down in history. The James Younger Gang escaped with an astonishing $55,000 in cash, further cementing Jesse James's reputation as the most wanted and admired outlaw of his time. After the spectacular success of the Rock Island train robbery, Jesse James and the Younger brothers had no intention of stopping anytime soon. Determined to strengthen their legacy even further, they continued their journey, meticulously planning each action. That's how, sometime later, they pulled off another stunning heist, this time against a bank, netting the gang no less than $62,000. With each crime, their reputation grew, but with it came something dangerous: overconfidence. At some point, they started to believe they were invincible, and that's when trouble began. Driven by this sense of absolute power, the gang made a crucial mistake. On a random night with no planning, no strategy, and completely drunk, they decided to rob another bank. This impulsive and reckless decision could only end badly. At that moment, everything they had built began to crumble. The robbery failed terribly, resulting in a disaster that would forever mark the end of their legendary story. The Old West was a land full of dangers and opportunities, but few groups managed to stand out as much as the famous Butch Cassidy's gang. They became known not just for their audacity, but for their precision in train robberies, a specialty that led to incredible stories and relentless pursuits. It all began on what seemed to be a quiet night in Wilcox, Wyoming. Near midnight, passengers relaxed in their seats, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Suddenly, a group of masked men stormed the Pacific Express train, making it clear they were there for one specific reason: the vault packed with money. Under the cold and determined command of Butch Cassidy, the outlaws knew this robbery had to be worth the risk. Cassidy didn't hesitate. With a carefully planned explosion, the vault door was blown open, unleashing an impressive haul of $50,000, a massive fortune at the time. This daring heist not only reinforced the gang's fame, but also put Cassidy at the top of the list of the West's most wanted criminals. After this grand success, the gang continued carrying out robberies that seemed straight out of a novel. But the more money and fame they gained, the more attention they attracted from the authorities. A relentless manhunt began, forcing Cassidy and his gang members to constantly flee, scattering and hiding to avoid capture. Billy the Kid and the Rustlers Gang, a name that deeply marked the Old West. Led by one of the most feared outlaws in American history, these cattle and horse thieves gained both fame and infamy in the region near the Mexican border. To local ranchers, the gang represented constant losses. Every theft meant lost money and sleepless nights. Additionally, rumors suggested that they were involved in something even more dangerous: counterfeiting money. This made the gang a double threat, challenging not only the law but also the entire local economy. However, what truly made Billy the Kid and his gang legendary was their ability to escape from prison. No jail cell seemed strong enough to hold them. But every streak of luck comes to an end. And for Billy and his crew, that moment arrived when Sheriff Pat Garrett decided to put an end to the menace once and for all. Garrett organized a determined group that hunted down and eliminated most of the Rustlers' gang members one by one. Billy the Kid, the man who seemed invincible, met his fate on a dark night when he was surprised and killed by Garrett himself. Ike Clanton was born into one of Arizona's most controversial families, the Clantons. Despite being known as large landowners, there was something shady behind the family's apparent wealth. The truth was that much of their cattle didn't come from their own livestock, but from illegal activities carried out by the Cochise Cowboys, a gang that operated secretly along the Mexican border. The Cochise Cowboys weren't just cattle thieves. Their actions went far beyond that. The gang frequently caused chaos in the region, ambushing stagecoaches and attacking unsuspecting wagon drivers traveling along the lonely Arizona trails. Their cruel methods made them feared by everyone in Tombstone, a town notorious for its lawlessness and violence. For a long time, the gang acted without consequences, spreading fear and maintaining absolute control over the region. However, every reign has its end. And for the Cochise Cowboys, that moment was about to arrive, marked by their inevitable confrontation with the legendary Earp brothers. Bert Alvord and the Alvord gang made history in an unexpected way. It all began when a man named Albert, known in the region for his questionable reputation, received an invitation from the local sheriff to uphold the law. But Albert was not someone willing to play by the rules. Instead of using his newly acquired badge, Albert gathered a skilled group and set out on a very different path, a daring train robbery. On that bright and sunny day, while one of the gang members, Downing, took care of the horses and kept watch over the area, the rest of the gang was already planting explosives on the tracks. By the time the train approached Cochise Station, everything was set. The explosion echoed across the region, completely stopping the train. Within seconds, passengers and crew were surrounded by the gang's pointed guns. With no resistance, they quickly made their way to the vault, seizing a fortune in cash and jewelry. But the story didn't end there. News of the robbery spread within minutes, and a relentless manhunt immediately began. Sheriffs, bounty hunters, and enraged citizens were determined to capture the criminals. However, Albert and his crew had one more trick up their sleeves. With agility and a surprising strategy, they hid their valuable loot in a secure location before vanishing without a trace. To this day, the Alvord gang is remembered as a group that defied the authorities and escaped with a fortune in their hands. But the question that remains is, where is all that treasure hidden? The Hole in the Wall gang might sound like just another curious name from the Old West. But this story goes far beyond what you've heard about bandits and outlaws. Deep in the wildlands of Wyoming, there was a kind of underground syndicate, an unlikely alliance of various criminal groups united by a common goal: escaping justice. The central hub of this criminal network was a strategic location known as Hole in the Wall Pass, and it was no accident that they chose this hideout. The geography of the area made it nearly impossible for sheriffs and authorities to approach undetected. Surrounded by rock formations, narrow passes, and treacherous paths, the location was a nightmare for any lawman daring enough to pursue them. Within this hidden refuge in the mountains, each gang had its own space: corrals, stables, and separate cabins. But despite sharing the territory, there was one strict rule that kept order among the outlaws. Each group had to secure its own supplies and never steal from allies. This was the essential condition for maintaining peace and trust among the criminals, who, despite everything, had to coexist to survive. Among all these gangs, one stood out and took the reputation of the Hole in the Wall gang even further: the legendary Wild Bunch. Led by some of the most infamous figures of the Old West, they became notorious for daring robberies and spectacular escapes, using this very hideout to evade Wyoming's harsh winters and the ever-watchful eyes of the law. Bob Dalton and his gang became known as one of the most feared groups of the Old West. But few know what truly drove them to become outlaws. It all started when Bob and his brother Emmett were respected lawmen, tasked with keeping order in the streets. But their peaceful lives came to an abrupt end when they were caught selling illegal liquor. Even though they were acquitted, they decided never to wear a badge again. In search of a new beginning, the Dalton brothers moved to New Mexico. It was there that they officially formed the feared Dalton Gang, launching a criminal career that would be forever etched in American history. Their first heist was modest. They robbed a gambling house, but the crime wasn't enough to gain notoriety. They wanted something bigger, something that would truly put their names on the map. That's when they decided to rob the same train that had been attacked by their idols, the legendary Wild Bunch. On the day of the heist, tension filled the train car as soon as the gang burst in, aiming their guns at the passengers. But what seemed like a foolproof strategy quickly turned into a major disappointment. They only managed to collect small change, nowhere near enough to justify the risk. At that moment, everything depended on the vault. While the Daltons struggled to break into the train's vault, the operator tried to escape to call for help. Before he could get away, the gang shot him. The tension escalated until finally the vault was opened, revealing $17,000 in cash. The gang vanished without a trace, gaining instant fame throughout the Old West. But do you know what really motivated that robbery? The truth is even more surprising than you might imagine. Bob Dalton and his brothers were successful ranchers and on the surface seemed to have everything they needed. However, the real fuel behind the heist was a personal vendetta between Bill Dalton and the powerful railroad company. Far beyond just money, their goal was to prove a point, seek revenge, and of course, feed their thirst for adrenaline. Now you know the true story of the Dalton Gang, the outlaws who chose danger as a way of life. Want to hear more incredible stories from the Old West? Click here to uncover another astonishing case.